Welcome to the second episode in a two-part Legendarium series about the life of Paracelsus. In this installment, we will talk about how Paracelsus challenged the leading medical thinkers of his day. During the 1520s, Paracelsus became a court favorite. Any self-respecting noble wanted a court alchemist to appear alongside the court poet, dwarf, astrologer, and giant. Perhaps during this time of his life, Paracelsus carried out one of his most infamous experiments. He claimed to have made a miniature human in a glass test tube called a homunculus. The famously bombastic man published his recipe, recommending that those who wish to create a homunculus place a man's sperm in an airtight container, bury it in horse manure, magnetize the bottle, and then feed the resultant creature human blood for 40 days, a reference to Christ's time in the wilderness. Afterwards, the alchemist would have a fully functioning, albeit miniature, human being. Paracelsus wrote that it may be raised and educated like any other child until it grows older and is able to look after itself. Other alchemists rushed to their laboratories to replicate the experiment. Many claimed success, but none actually produced a living homunculus, not even Paracelsus. In the end, the bombastic scientist claimed to have destroyed his experiment, for his creation did not have a soul. In 1524, Paracelsus returned to his hometown of Villach to find that his fame preceded him, likely in part because he healed the leg of a local publisher. The city fathers appointed Paracelsus town physician and lecturer of medicine at the University of Basel. Students from across Europe traveled to the city to hear his lectures. Pinning a program of his forthcoming lectures to the notice board of the university on June 5, 1527, Paracelsus invited not only students, but anyone who wished to learn. The authorities became incensed by this open invitation. After all, 10 years earlier, German religious reformer Martin Luther circulated his works in a similar manner, and the authorities preferred to avoid a second revolution. Later, Paracelsus cheekily wrote, "Why do you call me a medical Luther? I leave it to Luther to defend what he says, and I will be responsible for what I say. That which you wish to Luther, you wish also to me. You wish us both in the fire." 3 weeks later, on June 24, 1527, in front of the university, Paracelsus burned the ancient books of Avicenna, the so-called Prince of Physicians, and those of the ancient Greek physician Galen. By doing so, he meant a wholly break with ancient medical theory, which he believed was holding the profession back. This incident again recalled in many people's minds Martin Luther, who only 7 years earlier burned a papal bull that threatened him with excommunication from the church. Unlike Luther, Paracelsus seemingly remained a Catholic to his death, though some of his books went on the Index Expurgatorius, a catalogue of books judged to be against the Catholic faith. Similar to Luther, Paracelsus also lectured and wrote in German rather than Latin, which meant that anyone, not only the educated elite, could hear and understand him. In his Basel lectures, Paracelsus stressed the healing power of nature and denounced medical malpractice like patting wounds with moss or dried dung, which he argued prevented natural draining. He insisted that the wounds must drain, for if you prevent infection, nature will heal the wound by herself. He also attacked many other medical malpractices of his time, including useless pills, salves, infusions, balsams, electuaries, and fumigants. By the spring of 1528, Paracelsus fell into disrepute with local doctors and magistrates, as his criticisms took their customers away from him. Attacks against him turned vitriolic. Mocking poems circulated in Basel called him Caca Pharastus, a scatological pun on his given name, and his teachings dismissed as peasant wisdom. His enemies further accused him of ignoring ancient authority, needlessly generating new names for old diseases, and using poisons to replace traditional cures. When the authorities denied him lecture space at the university, Paracelsus simply spoke to growing crowds in open fields. Finally, the authorities forced Paracelsus to leave Basel completely. First, he traveled to Colmar in Upper Alsace, about 50 miles north of the university. During this trip, he stayed at various houses with friends and continued to travel for the next 8 years. In 1530, during the second itinerancy, Paracelsus wrote a clinical description of syphilis, a disease that had recently come into Europe from North America. He argued that the disease could be successfully treated by doses of mercury compounds, as alchemy held that mercury was the purest of compounds and could potentially be used to make gold and purify the human body. He also shocked the medical establishment by arguing that miner's disease, today called silicosis, resulted from inhaling metallic dust rather than trespassing miners, angering wrathful mountain spirits. Paracelsus further argued that treatment should target afflicted organs rather than the 4 bodily humors, and he used this theory to create new medicines, including a new tincture of opium for pain, a compound that he called laudanum. During the year 1534, he cured many plague-stricken people in Sturzing by providing them with orally administered pills made from bread containing a tiny amount of the patient's feces removed from them by needlepoint. While traveling, he wrote Der großen Wundarztni, or the Great Surgery Book. Published in 1536, he restored his reputation with this tome after his clashes with the university. He became wealthy and royalty again sought him out. Of course, Paracelsus did not wholly remove magic from treatments. In his examinations of St. Vitus' dance, a condition marked by an uncontrollable jerking and trembling of the limbs, Paracelsus recommended a combination of abstinence, fasting, and the destruction of a puppet doll created in the victim's likeness. In May 1538, at the height of his second period of renown, Paracelsus returned to Villach again to see his father. Sadly, upon his arrival, the great doctor learned that his father died 4 years before. Soon after, Paracelsus took an appointment under the Prince Archbishop Duke Ernst of Bavaria. In 1541, Paracelsus himself died in mysterious circumstances at the White Horse Inn in Salzburg. The disease which ended his life is not known for certain, nor do we have a precise description of what killed him, leading some to suspect that his enemies poisoned him. Regardless, by the time of his death, medical science began to bury the ancient practice of alchemy with Paracelsus. Later generations regarded him as the father of toxicology, the study of poisons and their effect upon the human body. That wraps things up for this episode of The Legendarium. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, press like. If you want to see more, press subscribe. And if you've got anything to say, let me know in the comments section. Thanks again for joining me, and I hope that you have a great rest of the day.